Hi, I'm Mark. Thank you for listening. Today, I want to share with you a video that I've done regarding the Feast of Trumpets. Feast of Trumpets is one of 7 annual feasts that God commands us to keep. Generally, you can find information on them in Leviticus 23 and in Numbers and some of the other books of the Bible. It's easy enough uh, to find the different verses that deal with describing these events. So anyway, I'll get right into it and uh, just go with it. Okay, now in Leviticus 23 of your Bible, God has identified these 7 different events which he refers to as the Feast of the Lord. And so far this year we've observed Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost. And so this next one coming up is, of course, Feast of Trumpets. So continuing, the 4th event, as I said, is Feast or the Festival of Trumpets. And this feast occurs on the first day of the 7th month, and that's of Tishri. That's in the Jewish or Hebrew calendar. That would be the 7th month. And also, the date corresponding to that on our Gregorian calendar is September 19th, 2020 this year. And that date, excuse me, the date on the Gregorian calendar changes every year. Unlike the Hebrew calendar, which it's fixed, it's always the same date. And about ours changes, but it's easy enough to find that date on any given year. And let's see. So going on, 4 is also is the number of new beginnings. And when Christ returns for his bride, otherwise called the family of God, the trumpet will sound the beginnings of a new age, the rulership of our Messiah. So when Jesus comes back, he will set up his government. And that will be a new age. It'll be brand new. And all our awful leaders of this world, they'll all be gone. All the institutions that we see now will all be gone. So it's a wonderful event to look forward to. There'll be much. It'll be a joyous occasion, especially for those people who are looking forward to the return of Jesus versus those people who do not want him to return. Those that don't love him, don't care about him. There's enough of those people around. It won't be a great day for them, but that's okay. It'll be good for us. Now, as well as Jesus returning at that time, all his saints from ancient Israel will also be resurrected, and that will include present-day saints that are loyal to God. And so any one of us that may be dead at this time will be resurrected, as well as all the saints from 2,000-3,000 years ago. And the one verse that does describe it pictures quite well his return would be 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17. So let me just read those 2 verses to you. Excuse me. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, and to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with him. Now, in verse Matthew 24:31, it's presented just a bit differently. And this reads, he shall send his angels, referring to Jesus, with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the 4 winds. So there's 3 verses there where Jesus is, it's saying that what Jesus will do, and that's verse 29, 30, and 31. So you might look at all of them. It's interesting to read that. It's kind of nice to see that also, because it's a bit of information regarding Christ's return. If you work with this information, you can't pick the day or when he's going to come back, but you can kind of see the season and see the events that will be occurring at the time of his expected return. Now, the trumpet was also used in ancient Israel during the Exodus from Egypt. with all their 2.5 million people that Moses was leading out of Egypt to the Promised Land. And Moses could have the trumpeters sound the alarm if danger was near, or if the people that were marching, remember there's a lot of them, if it was time to stop, or maybe it was time to start a new journey, but they could sound the trumpet. And they would also announce the feast, the different annual feast, with a couple blasts on the trumpet. Now, Numbers 10, 1 through 10, that's the Lord is speaking to Moses, and there's some verses I thought I might just make comment on. Verse 2 discusses the making of 2 silver trumpets. Verse 3, paraphrasing here, blow the trumpet to call an assembly of the people. Another example of use of the trumpet. Verse 9, go into war, blow an alarm. You should be remembered before the Lord and saved from your enemies. I think that's dealing with, God was known to fight many battles for the Israelites. When they showed faith and they were obedient to him, he fought many battles for them. And I think this might be referring to something like that here. And then verse 8 and 10 declares there's an ordinance forever. It's a reference to the Feast of Trumpets and also a memorial before God. And so it is, and we find that with all these annual Sabbaths, they're either it's either considered to be a statute to be kept forever, or to be a memorial, which is essentially the same, and that would be kept forever as well. And Revelation 15:19, regarding the trumpet, verse 15 tells you that the seventh angel at that time had sounded the seventh trumpet. And verse 18, the nations were angry. This would be during a time of war. And we know that when Jesus returns, there's much fighting. And in fact, Matthew 24:22 tells us that. Doesn't refer to Jesus by name, but it's obvious that Jesus is the main figure here. That if Jesus didn't return when he does, that there'd be no flesh saved alive. So that tells you how dramatic and how terrible that the war conditions would be at that time, if he has to come back in order to save the humanity, what's left of them. And but there's basically we see that the trumpets were used both for sound the time of his resurrection and times of war. Now in Leviticus 23 and 25, the Lord was speaking to Moses and saying that, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, in the 1st day of the month, shall you have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing the trumpets, and a holy convocation. And verse 25 says there, you will do no servile work. So regarding servile work, that again would be any work that'd be, you're really not supposed to be attending work, a job type work, and or working for a wage, doing anything, or conducting any business. You're not to conduct any business on a Sabbath day, any Sabbath day. And it is a one-day event. And the Holy Convocation would refer to, of course, attending a church service. And the memorial blowing the trumpets, well, that refers to, that's a yearly, you'd be doing this every year. And of course, the 7th month is that feast, or rather the month of Tishri. And so we're shown all the specifics that we need to know regarding keeping the Sabbath. And see, the feast is also part of God's redemptive plan. It points to Jesus, who will return at the 7th or the last trump. And it's a time of intense warfare. And I did make mention of Revelation 11:15 and Matthew 24. Now, probably 95, these are my figures, but I think I can't prove this, but I really believe this. Unfortunately, I think about 95% of all pastors, ministers, do not teach the annual Sabbaths, or the high holy days. It's another name for them. They're not taught in most churches, And I've been told that either they will not do it, or they do not, or they just don't keep, out of ignorance, they just don't keep uh, the 7 annual feast events. But and what they do say, I've been told this. What they say is that we don't keep those feasts because they have sacrifices attached to them. And of course, we don't keep sacrifices. Well, that's true, but that really is not a valid argument, because I can show you that the sacrifices came after the feast. God instituted the feast uh, way back when, and then later, I think probably through Moses, the sacrifices and the offerings were offered. They came in a later date. Now, one thing before moving on I'd like to mention is this is important. This is regarding the law. In excuse me, in James 2:10, it tells us that you must keep the entire. If you don't keep, say, if you keep 9, let's say commandments. There's 10 commandments. You keep 9 of them. Maybe a 10th one you don't keep. That's the same as not keeping them at all. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. Now here's what James does say. For whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become guilty of all of it. And so the example they give here in verse 11 is, for he who said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. If you do not commit adultery but do kill, you have become a transgressor of the law. So again, it's showing you that God expects us and requires us, he commands us to keep the entire law. And the law consists of, in part, of all the commandments. The 7 annual feasts are just an extension of those commandments, because the fourth commandment is to keep the Sabbath, the Saturday Sabbath, and in all but one of these feasts that there is a Sabbath associated with it, and that's Passover. There's no Sabbath there. That's a memorial. And that's a little different. It's considered one of the 7 feasts, but it's treated differently. The others all have Sabbaths required to be kept. Okay. Now, see, referring back to the pastors, the annual Sabbath, like I said, did exist before the law was I'm sorry. The Sabbaths or those annual feasts, they were instituted before the sacrifices. And the weekly Sabbath also existed before the sacrifices. Yet we keep the weekly, we do keep the Saturday Sabbath. But let me explain something here. There was a Saturday Sabbath, there was the annual Sabbath, and there was, I think there might have been Sabbaths with beginning of the new month. And even though those sacrifices all went away, right? We don't keep sacrifices anymore. They're all gone. But people say, some of these pastors say, well, we can't keep these annual annual feasts because there's these Sabbaths associated, but they don't realize that the Sabbaths came later. And so when the Sabbath went away, that did not mean that when the sacrifices went away, it did not mean that the Sabbath was going to go away. And so that's an argument. It's not a valid argument, but that's what they will tell you. So I just want to show you a verse. I've got a couple of verses that I want to read to you in Jeremiah 7:22 and 23, showing that before the Promised Land, the sacrifices at a point that they were not required until at a later date, but it was after the feasts were instituted. So let me just read a couple of verses here. So, for in the day that I brought, this is God speaking, that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. And so, and he did say, but this command I gave them, obey my voice, I will be your God and you shall be my people. And basically goes on to say, obey me and get, do what you're told and everything will be fine, basically. So we see that the annual Sabbaths were instituted, and then after that, the sacrifices came along. But the sacrifices went away for all the Sabbaths. Now, people recognize, even those pastors who are hold church on Sunday, even they are aware of the Saturday Sabbath, but uh, they still they don't recognize that the feast. Uh, what am I trying to say here? They don't recognize that the sacrifices, uh, while they apply to everything, they no longer apply to any of them. And so, if you can keep the Saturday Sabbath, certainly you can keep the annual Sabbath. Does that make sense? I mean, there's no reason not to. The sacrifices are no longer an issue, and they're not a reason. They're not an excuse to not keep those annual feast. There's no excuse there. And as far as the monthly Sabbath, if there was the trumpet. Let's see. Okay, Psalms 81, 3 and 4 tells me that if you blow the trumpet in the new moon in the appointed time on our solemn feast day, so it is referring to a feast, and it says it was a statute for Israel, which is it's a law, it's a command for Israel, and a law of the God of Jacob. Well, Israel and Jacob are the same person, we know that, but that's what God had instituted. So what's important to understand here is that there's no reason not to keep them, and they come up with all these guys the pastors and ministers, they come up with all sorts of excuses, and but they're not valid. Anyway, this is what God expects from us, and so it's important, at least to present this information to you. Now, my friend Deborah, she did tell me, she was pointing out that Rosh Hashanah is that the Jewish New Year is the same date. Well, this Feast of Trumpet is the September 19th, and apparently September 18th and 20th is the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. We're not discussing the Jewish New Year here. That's just a side note just to present to you. And so I wanted to let's see. Okay, so I wanted to show you that information so that you can understand what these pastors aren't understanding. And they're the ones that are supposed to be leading the flock and teaching. And if they're not teaching all the teachings in the Bible, which is God's word, and he says that it's all to be considered, it's not to be, you can't pick and choose and take what you want and leave the rest. God doesn't buy that at all. And plus, you can read in I think Zechariah and a couple other places, it says that when God comes back and sets up his kingdom, his government, he'll set up a new government here on earth, that we will be required to attend the feast of, I think we'll keep all the feast and attend the Feast of Tabernacles and in Jerusalem. And any family that does not, God will hold back the rain. And there's, I can think of another thing or two that he will do as punishment if they don't come around. And so he expects us to keep this. This is basically a commandment. He expects us to keep this statute. Statutes are just like a commandment. It's just part of the law. And so by not doing so, we're rebelling against God is what we're doing. We're simply saying, hey, that doesn't suit my needs. And some people will say, well, we keep Christmas. We have Christmas. We have Easter. We have Halloween. We have New Year's, and that's what they're doing in place of keeping the feast. Well, I can promise you, based on what God says in the Word, he doesn't accept that. And so everyone doing that will eventually have to answer to him for that. Anyway, this is not intended to be an in-depth study, but an overview or review for those who are familiar with the feast and maybe might appreciate just a little new information. Nothing new really, just a little, kind of a rehash of it. But I hope it's been of some value to you, and at least like a Sunday Sabbath, you can go to church, and you can pray about this and read about it, and God certainly is not going to have a problem with you doing that. I mean, doing that, I guess, is better than nothing, and maybe you can kind of introduce yourself slowly into these feasts. Well, anyway, thank you very much for listening. God bless you and your families. And I'll be back to you. The next feast coming up is the Day of Atonement. And so I'd like to make a short presentation to you regarding that feast or that day. We all just call it the Day of Atonement. So anyway, that's coming up next, about a week or so. Okay, thank you for listening. Okay, bye.